Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we mark today, day 502, the major story of the day, of course, is the fact that the Islamist Hamas does intend to release tomorrow the bodies of the Bibas family. To discuss that and more is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, a tough day is yet ahead of us, particularly tomorrow when the bodies of Shiri, little Kfir, and of course his brother are going to come back, unfortunately not among the living. What can you tell us about that, and what are we to expect?
So the Bibas family tragedy started on October the 7th, 2023, the morning of the horrendous massacre perpetrated by Hamas. Shiri was married to Yarden Bibas. They had two children, Ariel and Kfir, and her parents were also in the vicinity. They were murdered, the Silvermans. And the four members of the nuclear family, the Bibas family, were abducted to Gaza, but they were separated. The husband and father, Yarden, was kept elsewhere. Now, a few weeks after the massacre, when the first hostage release deal came into force in late November of that year, and the Bibas family was, of course, to be among the first to be released with other women and children, all of a sudden, Hamas announced first that it couldn't locate them, and then immediately after that, that they were killed in one of the Israel Defense Forces bombing. There is no evidence that this is true, and obviously tomorrow, when the forensic examination will be conducted on their remains, this is one of the questions which the Israeli public will demand answers for, to know whether Hamas lied or whether, again, tragically, the Israeli hostages accidentally fell victim to Israeli fire. There will be an additional, a fourth body that will be returned, and 2 days later, that is on Saturday, the 6 remaining hostages in this batch, out of 25 hostages who are alive, will be released and returned to Israel. And next week, the remaining 4 bodies, again, in this phase of the deal, will be returned, and the focus will be on negotiations regarding the second phase.
Indeed. Well, let's turn elsewhere here in Jerusalem, where we're joined by Mr. Ori Saschal, the head of the research department at the Israel Defense and Security Forum, namely known here in Israel as Habitchonistim. It's good to see you all. I'd like to immediately hear your perspective to these looming deals coming up at a time when there are high tensions, not only about the fact that the transition into stage 2 or phase 2 of this deal that was brokered by Egypt and Qatar under American oversight is conditioned upon the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, and also the guarantee that Hamas and other terrorist organizations will not take over the Gaza Strip in the day after. 2 points that, on the one hand, you see circulating reports as if Hamas agrees to this, but on the other hand, the official statements by Hamas reject this outright. So make some sense to us on this.
Good to be with you, Jonathan. Yeah, I would love to make some sense out of it, but there is very little sense in the kind of rattling reality where we're living. But look, I mean, I think we are beginning to sense the effects of the incoming Trump administration. The new administration is now has now taken control over a situation that has been a little bit rattling and unstable for over a year now. And we can see how once a transaction has been signed between Israel and Hamas, this is really what the logic behind it. Once we're inside a situation, a relationship, let's put it this way, between two parties where they're already inside the process, then we discuss the details. So there are some amendments, and some hostages are being returned earlier than expected. So 4 dead hostages, very unfortunately, will be released tomorrow, including the remaining Bibas family. Such a war crime to abduct infants from their bedroom. And then the remaining 6 living hostages in Phase A will be released on Saturday. So the reason why I'm encouraged is because not only the Israeli government now, but also the U.S. administration are speaking in very clear language and are not, biting their tongue, as we say. There's a clear message coming out of the White House spokesperson, Caroline Levitt, by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. All of them say that Hamas will not be in charge of Gaza in the day after. The United States is committed to eliminate Hamas. All these things were not messages we heard from the previous administration. So now we're in a situation where the United States understands that the day after in Gaza cannot be October 6th, 2023. We cannot go back to square one. Otherwise, we'll simply, turn the hourglass back to onto the next October 7th, God forbid, just like Hamas sworn to do again and again. Khalil al-Khaya, the Hamas official, who's now in Qatar, as well as other officials. So Israel understands that the day after in Gaza needs to be a fundamental change of the reality. In my perspective, this should be a total Israeli security control over Gaza, and in the day after, finding some sort of civil arrangement for the remaining Palestinians, and of course, enabling those who are willing to emigrate out of Gaza. All these things are revolutionary. I don't believe that they were on the table in the previous administration, and I think Israel will do well to use the very little time, relatively, that we have for the Trump administration, 4 years, right? We're only just beginning. But this critical moment, the golden opportunity to take advantage of the situation where we have the full backing of the White House and steam on into changing the reality in Gaza. In my perspective, as you said, Hamas is unwilling to accept these conditions. So we must resume the fighting, but in a different way, in a novel way. We have a different Minister of Defense now, a different Chief of Staff of the IDF. All these things change the spirit of the fighting, and now we're expecting the next phases. I do expect them to be different and not simply entrenching in the same type of repetitive warfare we have seen until now.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, President Trump's plan for the Gaza Strip for the day after is quite ambitious, to say the least, but beyond everything, it is out of the box, and it forces every actor in the region to recalibrate its thinking with regard to the Gaza Strip. In that context, if we're talking about U.S. domestic, we heard both Senator Lindsey Graham, who headed a Senate delegation here in Israel, come out and say that there is no appetite in the United States to take over Gaza. And Senator Blumenthal, who is, of course, from the other side of the aisle, a Democrat, came out and said, well, King Abdullah II convinced me that the Arabs will come and provide a new, better plan for the day after of the Gaza Strip that will also provide the guarantees of security and other guarantees for the state of Israel, for the Palestinians, and basically sold him world peace in a nutshell. But naturally, the Arab interests and the Israeli interests are not aligned when we're talking about the security of the state of Israel, and they might have aligned interests when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran with regard to other elements, but genuinely putting everything on the table, Israel, Jordan particularly, but also other countries, Qatar and others, they don't see eye to eye with Jerusalem. How can we mitigate any friction at this point in order to reach a solution that will work in the long run?
So let me, if I may, take issue with what Or and yourself just said, at least a little. It is a bit unfair to the Biden administration to say that it did not seek the removal of Hamas from Gaza. as long ago as early November 2023, the former Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, in Tokyo, laid out his outline. And one of the points was quite expressly that Hamas will no longer be able to rule Gaza or to threaten Israel from it. And the administration stuck to this position. Maybe it did not have a practical plan to implement it, but it certainly was on the agenda. Now, as for your comment regarding the difference in opinion between Israel and Arab countries or different interests, I would submit that it is very much in Israel's national security interest to have friendly or at least non-hostile regimes in Cairo and in Amman. And if a mass movement of Palestinians from Gaza, especially those who are aligned with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, if they go into Egypt and Jordan and destabilize the regimes by adding to the demographic imbalance, then it would be to Israel's detriment. So the question remains, who can rule Gaza? And the current Israeli government does not want the Palestinian Authority to take part in this new combination. But it seems as if the Arab governments may put pressure on the Trump administration to reconsider and have the Palestinian Authority in some way or another, some form, take part in this renewed rule over Gaza.
With regard to the first point, I do agree that early on the Biden administration was very vocal about the necessity to remove the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, that was not the case later due to the fact that it, simply put, highlighted that it did not believe that the removal of Hamas was viable, and therefore it started looking for alternative solutions to basically live with that reality. It was more concerned about humanitarian issues towards the end than anything else, and therefore we do need to take those points into considerations when highlighting those issues. With regard to your latter point, I completely agree that Jordan should not take any of the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. To say that it demographically impacts Egypt, despite the fact that it has more than 300,000 members of the Muslim Brotherhood already incarcerated in various camps throughout Egypt, is a little bit strong, considering the fact that it is a country of 105 million people. 1.8 million people is not that big of an impact on such a population. Nevertheless, there can be arrangements that, of course, accommodate something like this. And there are also third parties, other countries that President Trump and his team have mentioned along the way. So there are question marks about that. Of course, they have yet to unveil the entire plan. So we cannot really provide additional wisdom about whether or not it is viable in the current composition of the Middle East. But nevertheless, Mr. Issachar, I'd like to ask you if we may shift gears to Lebanon. On the one hand, we see the IDF has withdrawn yesterday from all of the positions except for 5 strategic posts, which were consented by the United States to remain there. Hezbollah has come out and stated outright those presence of those IDF troops, that's occupation, and we intend to resist that. Where are we expected to be in the next several weeks if Hezbollah once again, with the forces that still remain under its control, are starting to launch attacks for its own detriment on one hand, but also for its own interests of maintaining its validity as an armed force in Lebanon?
Yeah, look, the core motivation of Hezbollah to exist, the raison d'etre, is the armed struggle. And Hezbollah will always find an excuse to keep the struggle open. Otherwise, it would have no right to exist in its own eyes. And we have seen, even before October 7, how Hezbollah has made numerous demands. The 1 year before October 7, in October of 2022, Israel signed a gas accord with Lebanon after Hezbollah threatened and actually launched armed UAVs, armed drones into one of its gas rifts in sea, and presented a whole host of territorial disputes, including 17 points on the fence and the line number 1 and the blue line and the Raja village and the Shaba farms and all these places that Hezbollah keeps making false claims over. So we shouldn't really take these claims very seriously. What I'm mostly interested in is the incoming government in Lebanon, the new president, Joseph Aoun, who has vowed actually to disarm the remaining militias in Lebanon. There is a spirit in this government that says one state, one army, or one state, one arm. This really reminds us of the 1559 resolution to disarm all remaining militias in Lebanon other than the Lebanese army, the one that was never implemented. Hezbollah continued to be a viable force in Lebanon. So Israel has every right, after being subject to Hezbollah's continued aggression, after having been shot at 30,000 rockets and drones and anti-tank missiles on the part of Hezbollah, after being really threatened to its very survival, yes, Israel has a right to come and make security demands. I understand there's a very close cooperation between the Israeli and American governments, and so we need to see how the Lebanese army, the state of Lebanon, takes control over its own territory. This is the only thing that will satisfy decision makers in Israel and the Israeli people. This is not one government or another, but a reality where Israel cannot accept an Iranianized and armed South Lebanon, how Hezbollah is running practically everyday affairs in Lebanon. Now we have 5 Hezbollah sympathizers in the Lebanese government, but the direction seems quite tight. Saw President Trump sets a deadline of 1 month to the state of Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, threaten sanctions, or reportedly even cut humanitarian aid. All these things are to put pressure on Lebanon to finally take responsibility and disarm the remaining militias. I don't believe that the state of Israel and the state of Lebanon will have much reason to be in conflict after Hezbollah is finished.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to hear your take on the Lebanese file. On the one hand, we do hear, following the meeting, of course, between President Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam was there, the prime minister, as well as the Speaker of the Parliament, Nabil Berri, coming out and saying, we expect Israel to withdraw. But there don't seem to be too many disagreements about the necessity to disarm Hezbollah. They just don't really know how to do it, apparently, at this point in time.
The most precious asset is time. And obviously, the new Lebanese government, which, except for Nabil Berri, has new faces, even though General Aoun was the commander of the armed forces until the very moment he was sworn in as president. But in political office, both Aoun and the former judge of the International Court in Hague, Nawaf Salam, are newcomers and presumably, at least relatively, free of the pressures and corruption which characterized the former leaders in Lebanon. But they need time to stabilize the government and convince the public that it is in Lebanon's interest to get rid of all the malign foreign influences and put Lebanon, the country, back on its feet. It won't happen overnight. Now, Israel, from its point of view, also needs time in order to reassure the residents of the Galilee that they can now safely go back to their communities. And Israel is not wasting this time. The forces are still methodically combing the countryside, the places where Hezbollah used to hide its weapons turned against Israel. And slowly but surely, villagers on the Lebanese side are going back to their communities, sometimes only a few yards away from the Israeli villages or towns on the other side, like the Kile village which is separated from Metula on the Israeli side only by a fence. So if this trend keeps, eventually, as Or indicated, it may yet come out all right.
Shifting gears now to Yemen, where we had a very interesting meeting today between the Iranian foreign minister and the leadership of the Houthis there, during the course of which we heard Tehran's top diplomat come out and state that Iran will not negotiate with the United States so long as the maximum pressure campaign is active. Of course, we'll see how that translates in the next months ahead when the economy comes to a crash. But nonetheless, Mr. Issachar, I'd like to hear your take on that. Are we expected to see an increase of pressure? To keep also in mind that just on February 12th, earlier this week or last week, we had CENTCOM intercept yet another vessel, a fishing boat that was carrying dual use components for specific ballistic missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. Yet another significant catch in a sea of smuggled weaponry in order to prepare the Houthis for the days ahead.
Absolutely. So Iran continues to be the number one destabilizing country in the Middle East. And look, time is running short. You mentioned maximum pressure. That was relevant to the first Trump administration, where crippling economic sanctions could potentially change the course of the Iranian behavior. Even before that, with the Obama administration. Now we're at the point where Iran, according to the US Director of National Intelligence, has the capacity to manufacture 12 nuclear weapons within a very short period of time if it so chooses. And we have, on the one hand, President Trump was not extremely eager, at least publicly, to attack, but who says, I'm open to discussion, and I would like to get a great deal out of it. And on the other side, the Iranians, who say the supreme leader, he says it's even treacherous to deal with the Americans right now. I don't see any benefit of doing so. And the president, who is number two and has far, far less authority than the leader, is told to say that we will not negotiate with the United States at this point. So there is no negotiation, and Iran is enriching uranium meanwhile. And so we are at a very dangerous crossroads where we can wake up one morning to a nuclear Iran, and there will be very little we can do about it. Iran is threatening to destroy Israel. It is saying so openly. The supreme leader touted October 7 as a great achievement, and he continues to vow to destroy Israel. Just last week, he said it again in a public event. So all these things, all the domino stones are falling in one lane. This Hamas, Hezbollah, maybe the Houthis, and now it's the turn of the Iranian nuclear program. We're not talking about regime change or boots on the ground. We're talking about a preemptive strike that would deny Iran from its nuclear capacities to really disrupt and throw the Middle East into chaos. I think it's detrimental to the United States interests to allow Iran to nuclearize. We don't need a nuclear Middle East. That's the last thing we need for world peace. And denying Iran this capability will also open the door to Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, maybe the rest of the Muslim world. This is precisely the road to do it. One last point, I see how this also creates really the only obstacle on the way to create an alternative trade route from India. We just saw Prime Minister Modi visiting Washington, from India into the Arab Peninsula and onto Israel and onto Europe. This is the trade route that would present an alternative to Iran's really grip over global trade, Persian Gulf and Central Asia. This will only come to the greatest benefit of the United States interest and pave the way to Middle East peace. But Iran continues to be the most dangerous country in the planet right now, certainly in the Middle East, because of the nuclear program.
Commonly referred to as IMAC, of course, the interconnector between India through the Middle East into Europe. But Mr. Owen, we don't have very much time left, and I'd like to still ask you, since negotiations took place yesterday in Riyadh, or in Saudi Arabia for that matter, between the United States and Russia, and while the contents of that meeting is interesting by itself, since the implications for Ukraine and Russia are going to be vast, and we need to wait to see how everything evolves. Nonetheless, I'm more interested now to hear from you about the messaging. of the fact that this is taking place in Saudi Arabia. What is this message being sent to the Iranians?
Well, this is not necessarily the most important aspect. Secretary Rubio, happened to be on a Mideast tour. He was in Israel. He was in Saudi Arabia. He went on to UAE. And it was very convenient to find a neutral place. And Mohammed bin Salman was happy to host this meeting. Now, Steve Witkoff, the special envoy and good friend of President Trump, who earlier took part in the Israeli indirect Hamas negotiations, was still in on this meeting, along with Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz, across the table from Sergei Lavrov, which means that he has a very, very important role in the administration. The lesson for Israel is less encouraging. It means that the Trump administration could talk above Israel's head if it deems it in the American national interest. The administration should allay such concerns by American allies and partners, including Israel.
Well, from what I hear, there is no daylight between the United States and Israel when it comes to almost everything that we're talking about here in the Middle East. And it's unprecedented to the level in which this is aligned. Of course, it's very early on. We're only in the first month of this administration. We'll have to wait and see how things evolve. Hopefully it continues this way, and we'll be able to resolve plenty of issues, but time will tell. With that, I'd like to immediately thank Mr. Issachar and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.